Today is March 17th, an open meeting of the Berlin Historical Commission, starting a bit late at 11:05, is it? 11:05. Meeting posted for 11 a.m. And I'll take a roll call attendance. Barry Ager.
Here.
Janet Woodward.
Here.
And June Miller here. Aye.
Aye.
Aye, yeah. Our first order of business is to acknowledge the demolition permit that's been filed for 100 River Road West. It's for an outbuilding. And the three of us preceding this meeting actually had a chance to go to the site and view that and speak to one of the people who will be responsible for the demolition, Mr. Moran, James Moran. So is there any discussion of what we saw?
If I might, I'm going to screen share a little bit and go to the bylaw just so we look at the pertinent stuff that has to do with what we're doing for this action.
Okay, that would be good.
Demolition delay bylaw was passed in 1999. So we've got 23 years of experience with it at this point. And when a demolition permit is received by the building inspector, the building inspection office, they have to, if you look at section 3, no demolition permit shall be issued for a significant building without first complying with this provisions of this bylaw. And B, the inspector shall follow a copy of each application for a permit to demolish a building or part of a building to the commission. C, if the demolition permit application is for a building which is 50 or more years old, the building's historical significance will be determined by the commission within 14 days of the commission's receipt of the application. And the commission will notify the building inspector and so forth in writing. I've got to move it here. Of this initial determination. If the building is not determined to be significant, the building inspector may issue a permit to demolish in accordance with all applicable procedures. D, if the building is determined to be significant, then the commission shall hold a public hearing within 30 days of this initial determination to further determine whether the demolition of the building will be detrimental to the historical, cultural, or agricultural, architectural history, heritage of the town. Notice the time and place and all the stuff about notices for it follows. And then E, we have 10 days after that public hearing to determine whether it is an important building to be preserved. I would go back to the definition sections in the left column and look at significant building. Any building which is historical because of its age, in whole or in part 50 or more years, and is determined by the commission to be either one, associated with a person or event in contributing to the cultural, political, economic, social, or architectural history of the town, Commonwealth of the United States of America, or two, historically or architecturally important in terms of period, style, construction, or association with an architect or builder, either by itself or in the context of a group of buildings. And then beyond that, the preferably preserved significant building, any significant building for which it is determined after public hearing to be in the public's interest to preserve or rehabilitate rather than demolish under this bylaw. So what we have to do now is to determine whether the building in question is a significant building or not. If we so determine, then we go to a public hearing and the public gets a chance to weigh in. And that's the business about preferably preserved. If the public isn't interested, then even if it's significant, it's not preferably preserved because the public doesn't care about it. So at this point, we have the question of whether the building in question is significant. I would like to just say a couple of things about the history of the thing. There was a demolition permit filed for both the brick house and the barn on the location we're dealing with today some years ago. And we had a very well-attended public hearing. 40, 50 people came. And were very vehement that this was an important structure, particularly in regard to the house and barn, that they were important structures and so on. And so we had a demolition delay and we put the delay on, but there were a number of efforts made to try to find another buyer or something like that, but we weren't able to accomplish anything with it. And after the 6-month delay, it was, then it was out from under the protection of the bylaw, but the demolition never took place. The demolition in that case was really thought to be a case where the owner was trying to press the town to bail him out on the property. We've had many cases where demolitions have been determined to be the buildings have been determined to be not significant for a variety of different reasons. And at this point, this building that we're now dealing with, I really don't believe is 50 years old. So it doesn't even come under the bylaw. But at any rate, if we decide to just determine that takes it off of the bylaw entirely, but we can also make a declaration that it's not significant if we want to, or we can determine that it's significant for some reason. But that gives a little idea of what we're dealing with the bylaw. I move to determine that this building is not significant.
I second. Is there any discussion?
And my reasoning is, there's 2 points I would make. One is, I question whether it's even 50 years old. And secondly, it doesn't reach back into the deep history of the town or of the property.
So we have a motion and a second. We can vote. Barry?
Aye.
Janet?
Aye.
And June? Aye. So we have a unanimous approval that
This is not a significant building.
That the metal shed that we investigated is not, for which this demolition permit has been applied, is not historically significant. Okay, I'm not sure.
I will draft a letter to that effect and send it to the building inspector.
Okay, great. Okay.
Do we have provision on the agenda for this meeting to take up any other business?
Yes, I outlined a few things at the Bullard House, just housekeeping things actually. And if time permits, we could touch on two topics. One is programming possibilities, and the other one was is funding options that have been set in motion, and maybe just to list those. I don't know if you want to get into much of a discussion about that today, but we should have that. We should be mindful of that because a lot of them are time sensitive. And then there's another category for anything else that might have come up. I do have the first thing on the Bullard House is the cellar stairway. I went over there with Janet yesterday morning so we could have a look, and and we actually went down in the cellar so Janet could see the cellar. And you had previously said that you were very pleased with the stairs, with the stairway, and we were too. And actually, I received the invoice for it, the $1,750 invoice to pay Tim. I'm not sure that, I mean, would he have sent the invoice to us if the building inspector hadn't inspected it yet? Or do we need to make sure?
He might have. That was one of the other things I wanted to ask the building inspector, and we'll, after this meeting is over, confirm that. I want to make sure that it has been inspected before we pay the bill.
Okay, well, we could move to pay the bill contingent on that positive inspection.
Yep.
And
I so move.
okay, second.
How would you like to word that?
Let's see. Move to pay the invoice of $1,750 to Squaw Hollow Restoration.
All right, wait a minute.
Yeah.
700, how much again?
1,700.
I mean, 17.
Yep, 1,750 to Squaw Hollow.
Yeah.
For fabrication and installation of the cellar stairway at the Bullard House. Contingent.
Wait a minute.
Okay.
Cellar stairway.
Contingent upon a positive inspection by our building inspector. There's probably a different way to say that, but
That's fine. Does it?
Yeah, that's good.
okay.
I should have learned shorthand.
Oh,
I
I don't know. Do people still do that? I guess.
don't know.
Yeah.
I don't.
What?
I never did. Yeah. Okay, so that was the one important piece of bullet.
All right, you have the motion. You need to second
Oh,
that.
I'm sorry, we didn't vote.
Oh.
No, we didn't vote.
Okay, but we have a second.
Yes, I
Okay.
second it.
Okay, Barry. We have a
I
roll
moved.
call vote. Okay.
Yeah.
Barry, aye.
Aye.
And Janet
Aye.
and June, aye. Okay, approved unanimously to pay Squaw Hollow for the cellar stairway contingent upon the building inspector's approval. Okay, the second little thing was the threshold. I did try to see June Poland just to make sure that if I contacted Cronenberger, I wouldn't be out of line to follow up on at least the previous authorization that had been made by Elaine with Margaret's permission. But June was out for classes, so I didn't get to speak to her, but she'll be back Monday and I'll try one more time. But I would, it's not clear to me whether I could just email Margaret at this point. I don't, it's not.
Well, Margaret's still on leave,
She's
as far
still
as I know.
okay.
Um,
She has answered a couple of things that I noticed.
Yeah.
But I'll wait for June. It's only Monday. that I have to wait for. And if she
Yeah,
said,
yeah.
and I have the only piece of documentation that we have as a commission, which is an email that Elaine sent to Jason Cronenberger, authorizing him to fabricate that threshold. And then she reiterated the description of how it should be fabricated and installed. And that was it. And you know, I'm not sure of what other protocol had to be observed, but that's all we have to show that they had been asked to do it, and that Elaine had been authorized to go forward. So the other two things would be programming possibilities that would promote what we're trying to do at the Bullard House. And the other piece would be these funding options that have been set in motion. So I guess I defer to Barry and Janet as to whether you want to get into that today.
Maybe just briefly to say that we're hoping to keep programming going along, and we're coming up with things that we could offer in small groups, similar to what you've been doing over at 19 Carter, June. But also, you know, there may be some large group programs too. We just want to welcome any suggestions for things that people might like to learn to do or talk about or hear about in terms historically. And I think that's about it.
Yeah.
And programs can be held in a lot of different places, but what we're hoping to do is to remind ourselves that the hard work that's gone into and is continuing to go into getting the Bullard House fixed up is reinforced by realizing how nice it would be to be able to have these programs in that historic environment of the Bullard House.
The Art and Historical Society has been talking in this line too of late, and the board of directors. And Janet will be having a meeting on the second Tuesday of April of the board of directors. And I'd like to, as president, I'd like to invite you to attend that because we have been brainstorming about programs we can offer, and particularly smaller attendance programs because of the COVID thing, which is still around. And, you know, trying to plan big events and then having a COVID outbreak is really something we want to avoid. So, but things that we can be doing so that we have an active program going on. Historical Society, unfortunately, we've just kind of let it lay for 2 years, and that's in terms of public programs. And that was, it seemed appropriate to do, but at the same time, we need to move away from that now and make some things happen. So I hope you might come to that meeting, and we'll be talking more about that stuff at the society level. Again, the society being a membership organization and one that has traditionally done more of the public programming stuff than the town commission.
I think it would be, I'm trying to think of ways to promote people's awareness of the Bullard House without being able to go in there and to be excited about going forward with, you know, renovating it and restoring it. And one of the ideas I had was to look more closely at that National Register document and talk about the people that we know lived there. I think it could be interactive somewhat. I don't know if people would be comfortable with role playing the Johnson sisters, or, you know, I'd like to come up with some way we could
Mhm.
really put some flesh on what what happened there. I mean, there's no end of information about all the different construction periods and the kinds of doors and the changes in the windows. I was trying to read a lot of that last night, and I think that's important for us to be aware of, but I think the public would be more interested in the people and what happened. So if maybe I
But
could
one of the things is when you do things about the people, and I mean, for instance, if you take the Johnson sisters,
yeah,
they're they of course grew up in your house, Janet. And then when the family was going to sell the house, they bought half of the Bullitt house and moved up there, the two sisters that were, not married. But when that happened, there was a renovation of their end of the house. And that's when the big old chimney got taken out, the big old cooking chimney and so forth got taken out. And the door around the corner, they changed the stairs. And so the door moved around the corner from the front of the house. And that door is a Greek Revival period door, indicative of that renovation. And they also put in long windows in the front of the front room, which was the Greek Revival style thing, that windows that reached down just about to the floor. And those windows were there until the 1950s. I can remember when the windows in the house didn't match at all from the left hand right side and the right hand side. But those are characteristics that you can talk about that relate to the house and things people can observe at the same time that you're talking about these people. And then those ladies and the things that they did in the community and so forth, in how they lived their lives, is all part of that. I think that we could actually do something kind of good with a couple of pictures relating to that renovation, and then some stuff about them, who I don't think we have any pictures of, unfortunately. But that we could make a good thing that could be put up in 2 or 3 pieces on the Facebook, as well as
face-to-face
a program, an afternoon program where we had a chat about the ladies and some of the different things that we have that relate to
and we have
their tenure.
we have some costuming that we could exhibit as from that period, don't we? It's early, I know, but
Well, no, we've got some clothing that could be shown. It's not theirs, but it's of a period that they would probably have had.
Yeah, and maybe there would be an opportunity to maybe talk about food a little bit. I mean, this is not my specialty, but just domestic related domestic issues that would have been part of their lives at that time. I mean, I think, it's all by analogy. I mean, we don't have those, we don't have a diary that they wrote, but
No.
But we do have a diary of their successor, or diaries of their successor in this house.
Yeah.
That would be fun to share as well. Cordelia, after whom we
in this house,
named the farm. Yeah, this house. You were talking about the Johnson sisters, and so it'd be fun. I think people would enjoy that.
Yeah.
But that kind of thing, with a picture or two that relates to it, can go on Facebook, and we could have an afternoon talk about it. It's not something that we've got an awful lot of material, but there's enough things to share that might relate to it. And then then we've got the Bullets, and we've got the shoe business and the fellas that apparently boarded there when they were working in the shoe shops nearby. I mean, we've got a series of different things that way. And then we've also got, collection stuff. You can do something about the parlor, and we've got pictures and so forth of the Betsy Carter portrait that normally hangs there, and other things that we've done that aren't so much about the history of the house as they are about how we've been interpreting it thus far ourselves. And I mean, any of those things could make a nice little subject to deal with this stuff. And there are others. I mean, then you've got the business of the American Legion when they came back from the war and the World War I, and they had their meeting room in the upstairs room, and the hardwood floor that's there that we believe came from that period. And what are the bits and snippets? We don't have very much, but we have a few bits and snippets that we could use with that. There are pictures that in the background you can see there was an outside stairway that led up to that room at one time in that period. And in fact, we've got the pictures when Richard had the siding off the house on that end of the house.
Yes.
You can see where the present window was a door upstairs. And so, you've got 3 or 4 things you can use. As I say, it would make a perfectly good thing to put on the Facebook page about it. And just that little bit that tells us some things that would be, that we can share and get people focused on the history of the house and some aspects of why we've chosen it to preserve.
Also, we can talk about the well, this is very early, but the store, whatever is mentioned in the deeds, and what it might have had in it. I mean, this will take some research and some planning, but that's a possibility. Also, the tavern, that stretch of time when it was a tavern, which I guess was not very long, maybe, was it more than 10 years?
About 20.
About 20 years. And
I was thinking
there must be quite a bit written about that period, that time, and what the kinds of people that would have stopped there, and and what part of the house was there then, what did the house look like then in the tavern period? There's lots of ways we can do this without actually having people in there, which is
the tavern.
Get excited.
The expansion of the house to the full size of the salt box section was done for the tavern use, for the public use. And I mean, before it was just a narrow half a house that is really amusing in terms of how it's grown since. But and then they added onto it 3 more bays to make a 5-bay building, and that was for the tavern. That was because they were using it for a public place. And the store business, apparently there was another building somewhere on the Johnson sisters side that was a store. It's referred to in the deed as a store, and yet we really don't know what it was. And apparently it was, by the way it's stated, it was apparently a separate building. But we know that was there in the period that John Dexter was the innkeeper, and that was prior to Solomon Howe. And Solomon Howe came from Marlborough and continued the store business and the inn business there until 1813 when he sold it. And by that time he had built the new store building that is the one that's still in use as the store over at the corner of Pleasant Street. And obviously he built something much bigger and much more indicative of its importance to the community, and probably reflected a considerable increase in business from what it had been at the other site.
Well, we have, we have some very basic information that we'd have to embellish with period research.
Well, and
But it'd be fun for people,
Yeah, and I think, well, that's what I was thinking, that people who maybe up to this point have not gotten too involved in the history of the town. We're talking about programs that would require some help digging through some of the research, and we may find that we start to engage more people in helping with some of these tasks in order to make these events happen. We have a great group of people in the Historical Society who work very hard on a lot of those kinds of activities. So we've already started with a good group.
We don't have much for record of what went on when it was the inn at the Bullet House, other than the building and the public room upstairs and so forth. But we do have some excerpts from a diary of Mrs. Howe in the new store building, I don't know, 1816 or so, and talking about how many, people they served at meals and other events, and when they had a ball and so forth in the building. And there was a ballroom in the new store building as well as the one that's in the Bullet House. So, I mean, some of those subjects are still, any of those. We don't necessarily have enough to make really heavy programs of that, but we have enough to do the kind of snippets you want for Facebook or for a little afternoon chat.
Yeah.
So there's a lot we can do with that. And I mean, my thought is if you start to have a series of these things, you can, you don't have to do the Bullet House every time, but you can do the Bullet House every second or third time in some aspect of it. And that way get the Bullet House constantly entwined in the town history. But you do other subjects too, so that you you give more people a chance to get interested, depending on what their various areas of interest might be. I mean, it's like your railroad thing you've got going at 19 Carter now. That there's people that will follow that might not be as interested in other things. But if you offer things on different subjects like that, it's good.
That's a good way to look at it. Whatever if we had a tavern period theme, we can obviously we would relate it to what we have here at the Bullet House, but we would be able to use period research to make it come to life a little bit for people. That'd be great.
The business of the stagecoaches came later than the Bullet House, but the stagecoach business was a big thing, and the stagecoach line from Boston to Barry had they had the lunch stop at the Howe Tavern in Berlin. So the middle of the trip stop for a meal was in Berlin, and so that was that was an interesting and important thing that came after the Bullet House. But if you take the whole business of the tavern and the inn and the store and all that, there's no reason you can't talk about different periods that relate to it all.
Also, it's good promotion for the Center Village as a special place.
Oh yes. Oh yeah. Definitely.
Gary, do you know if the markets that people would be taking animals to passed through this area as they drove animals to market? Or was this sort of off the beaten trail? mean, that's something that maybe we have to research too. Maybe-
That would be something I don't know much about. It's always possible. I know that I know that, what we now know as Route 20 or the Boston Post Road would have been very significant for that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
I remember when I was
Might have been
working,
here too.
when I was working at Sturbridge Village, we used to talk about turkeys. People would drive their turkeys, and at night, the turkeys would they'd stop at a common or someplace where there was a tavern, and the people would stay there, the drovers, and the turkeys would fly up in the trees and just roost. And then in the morning, they'd come down and head off again. I don't know that would be one of our stories. I wish it was, because it's so much fun to tell, but
Yeah.
I'm sure there are similar kinds of things that get unearthed when we, and have
Well,
been unearthed already.
Esther Whitcomb, in her book about Bolton, that she did in 1988, does have a reference to the turkeys being driven through and
Huh.
driven off to market in a herd, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah.
And she refers to a number of things like that. And usually, when she talked about things like that, she had some kind of a reference that she got that from. That was, had just there was just enough
Mhm.
to indicate that had happened in, it had happened in the town of Bolton. And I
Yeah.
would assume it would have happened here too. That somebody would just drive some through that was coming from a town to the west. I'm sure it would have happened that way. And maybe sometimes they wouldn't have used the post road because it was too busy, so they'd go on a back road to drive the turkeys or to drive other animals. Yeah, I mean, in the days before refrigeration, you didn't want to kill the animals till you had them in the place you were going to eat them.
Yeah.
And we know that they drove swine and probably turkeys and stuff off to feed the Revolutionary Army, because the whole thing of the revolution is just the most fascinating thing about a grassroots effort, because the common people, just like what's happening in Ukraine right now, where the ordinary people, well, they're not out there with a gun, but they're making sweaters for the people that are, and they're making barrier pieces that you can put up to stop the tanks, and they're making, people are just doing whatever they can do that relates to the fight, even though they're not on the front line. And that's the same thing that was happening in the American Revolution. And there was no centralized logistical stuff. And when the army needed food, they'd ask the states for food, and the states would ask the towns for food. And so
Yeah.
Bolton would get a cow, say a beef critter, and they'd drive it down to Berlin, and somebody else would get one here, and they'd put them together, and they'd drive them off to Shrewsbury, and they'd they'd gather along the way, getting more and more of them, and they'd drive them to Pennsylvania to feed the army. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that was going on. And they did the same thing with shoes. They did the same thing with blankets. People would make things in the towns, and the needs for logistical support would end up in local town meetings saying, okay, how can we get some blankets, and who can help with that? And then they'd put a committee on to get the blankets together and get them over to the next town, or to Worcester or someplace from which they'd go on further to be shipped off to the army.
Barry, I want to go to your programs.
Yeah.
And I
That'd be
think
great.
so will a
Yeah.
whole bunch of
Yeah.
other people once
Yeah.
we.
Well,
and
I did a program on that
Yeah.
in 1976. But
Yeah.
it's good stuff, and we haven't done anything with it for a long time. So that's always a good thing to do. And the other thing we've got in 4 years, in 4 years, we have the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution.
Oh, that's right.
So
250.
4 years from now, we're going to retread all of that material and again, and
Do you want to
deal with it.
you want to just talk briefly about the funding options that have been set in motion, or do you want to have a separate meeting for that?
Well, I think we can talk about it a little bit. I mean, we've got 100,000 that was voted by the town a year ago. And that's for the foundation. That was predicated on the idea that we were going to dig all the way around the building and pour a concrete foundation and so forth. At the town meeting where that was brought up, one townsman who's pretty knowledgeable about building things suggested that we really could repoint the foundation from the inside and accomplish the same thing with a lot less expense. And I wonder whether it would be of use to us to consider talking to that individual and just considering that as to whether we think it's a viable alternative, and perhaps presenting it someplace else in that regard.
So you're
Because-
talking about Squaw Hollow right now.
I'm talking about what was in that report originally, yeah.
But yeah, okay.
And
The first one, yeah.
the question is, could we accomplish the aims of that with a little bit less expense? And maybe then we could liberate a bit of that money to pay for the architectural services that might be related to getting that work done and some of the other stuff. And I need to go back and see what the phrasing of the town meeting warrant article was to see how much wiggle room we've got there. But I'm just trying to figure out
I
how
don't
we
think
could go.
I don't think we have any, actually. I mean, well, it says foundation drainage. I'm not even sure it says possible bulkhead.
Yes, it does. It has
it
the
does,
bulkhead in it. I
yeah.
know it does that. And of
um,
course, the bulkhead is another issue I think we should talk about.
Yeah, whether that's a good idea or not.
Well, I think it's a good idea to have one, but my question is whether it's worth the expense and the upheaval it's going to cause, because in order to put in the bulkhead, we're going to have to move the oil tank down cellar and all that stuff. So, I mean, we just need to, doesn't mean we wouldn't do it. It just means we need to think about it and decide what our priority might be with it.
Do you think if we have a conversation with Squaw Hollow, wouldn't we really talk about, well, the focus would be on the money that we have for sure, and the purpose for which it was designated, but we would have to integrate that second report. I mean,
Well, yes, I agree. And we already have a proposal before the town for another 100,000 from CPA money to come up at the coming annual town meeting. And we have at least the impression that the CPA committee is likely to recommend that. And if so, it might get through town meeting as easily as it did last year. And that suddenly gives you 200,000 to work with. Again, the wording of the article is very important, but I'm trying to, those are the two things that we have
pending.
with major money. There's a little bit left in the account from the mitigation money from the Highland Commons.
About 11,000.
Yeah, we've got a little bit left to spend there. And
I'll get a total.
taking those together and seeing what we can do. And then secondly, you know, going around the bend, we still have the possibility of going for a preservation projects grant next year for another 100,000.
Does anybody know if the select board continued their discussion of the ARPA funding? I didn't attend the select board meeting this past week.
I'm sure they're going to be continuing that on a regular basis. Just how much they're going to decide to actually do remains to be seen, because Mr. Hawkins said that he had pressed them to do some things, and the other two didn't want to deal with it yet. They
Yeah,
wanted
that's
to,
right.
they wanted to put off a decision on trying to spend more of that money. They have already spent some. They've already put some money toward things for the Council on Aging and serving the aging community a bit, with more time for the director and a bit more program money for them.
Well, what I see is that we will get, I'm pretty sure we'll get ARPA money for architectural services. I'm not sure how much, but it would certainly cover, if we go by that 15% standard, it would cover the foundation and whatever other structural work has to be integrated with that. I think
Yeah.
that, but we wouldn't have the money. Well, we don't know. We don't know how much the foundation and whatever, we don't have bids for that. We need, I guess we need our ARPA money. Maybe we'll get the other CPA money. I just want to mention quickly that it may be that is it the Central Mass Regional Planning Commission?
Yeah.
They would be able to listen to our plan, or the plan that's been proposed, at least for the MHC grant. They would listen to what that's all about, and if they could help us, they might be able to offer support so that it's
On the preparation of documents and so forth.
yeah. I mean, they've not apparently they've not actually supported a grant before or helped with one, but they would be willing to listen to us and help if they could. So that's, because in my mind, I just couldn't see a way forward to do all that work for the grant.
Well, yeah, I mean, but grant writing, they could advise and perhaps help with some elements of that file. And also Margaret, I mean, grant writing is part of her area to work on. And so I would expect her to advise us widely on that process. And we, because the other thing is you have to have architectural plans for things that you do with the Preservation Projects Fund, and you can, and at least some things certainly of the major work that's from the structural survey, the same kind of thing. I think we need to sit down and kind of go through the structural survey and talk about it.
Okay.
And think about what we think about it. I have mixed feelings about various things there, but I understand that I've spent some time with the supplementary report this week, and I have a better understanding of it, although there's a couple of things in it that I think I question whether he really knew what he was talking about on them, but in terms of what's been done in the past. But some of the things that we did, particularly with El Macquarie, we dealt with this particular problem in a certain way, and it was probably a good, satisfactory way to deal with that problem. But it also meant that we were dealing with that area of the house in isolation from the rest of the house. And some of what is clearly in Tim's recommendations is treating the whole house, getting it so it's structurally all tied together more.
That's right.
And he had concerns of how that was going to work.
Well, do you want to
I
schedule?
might say that one of the things that's in this, and our guilt from the past, is that we tried to deal with one set of problems to get so we could, work on getting the house open, getting the museum open and working, and not worrying about all of the problems that might be there for the long term. And some of the things that we're addressing with big money are things that could wait for another 20 or 30 or 50 years to be addressed. In other words, the house isn't going to fall down, and it should be safe to use, even if the bathroom structure and the kitchen structure aren't tied together as well as they ought to be. I mean, you know, but Tim's approach is fix everything that there is to fix, and you know, I won't say make it like new, but at least that's you know, a certain amount of that kind of thinking, and that's all good, but at the same time, I don't know. The $500,000 price tag that we are faced with at this point, we just have to evaluate the different items in it, talk about them, so that we all understand them and decide what we think.
Do you want me to try to schedule a meeting with Tim to
What-
go over the
Yeah.
reports?
I'd like us to meet and talk about it first, because we can
You-
crystallize some of our questions
Let's talk
before we.
about it first. Okay. And then maybe schedule something later. And Janet has something to add here.
I was just going to say, I think as we talk about what needs to be done and what the list is, and when Carl was on the commission, he put together a pretty comprehensive list that helped me to understand the whole scene. But I think that we have to remember that the other component is time. How much time do we want this to take? And I always think of, I'm sure Evie wouldn't mind, Evie Dewick, if I brought this up in a meeting, but you know, she always said that the fact that they had to go only as fast as they could raise the money turned out to be a really strong thing for them, because they ended up making a lot of changes in what their original thoughts were, and their changes that they really were glad they made. So I don't want to drag our feet, but neither do I want to see us have deadlines that we're creating that may force us not to think things through as thoroughly. And the other thing that we have to remember is that every year we're going to get $50,000 from CPA
That
money.
belongs to preservation.
Yeah. And so, you know, and so we're always going to be able to move forward at least that much. And it may be, I just want to propose that without dragging our feet, which I have no interest in doing, it may be a good thing if we have to do a little bit at a time, and that may be something we want to consider as we think about how, I mean, at 19 Carter, we moved into the bottom of the basement floor and had, what, a couple of years maybe of really good programming and a lot of fun, and a lot of work was being done upstairs at the same time. And, you know, we may even be able to think it through and say, there are ways that we could use part of this for something and continue to work on the other part. So I just want to point out that we should be talking about timing as well as jobs that need to be done.
Oh, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
And I also think that, I mean, what we've done so far in the Bullet House, like when we worked on the parlor, the fact that we concentrated on that and dealt with a lot of details there, we got a better outcome than we would have if we had the whole house being done at the same time. And the same thing very much is the case with the entrance room that is not finished, but it's darn near finished.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least it would be if it weren't for the fact that now there's second guessing on the underpinnings. But you know, we definitely got a better result because we took our time and worked on solving the problems and figuring out what we wanted there over a period of time. And I mean, it's like at one time I really wanted the wainscot that had been in that room previously to be restored there. And I was thinking of it in terms of maybe a Victorian remodeling. Well, it turned out it was really 1940s that stuff was put in there, and which made me less interested in preserving it. And then secondly, in the process of working with the architect on that, we came to the conclusion that we could produce some exhibit space in that room, as well as the entrance business. And that made me think, I don't want the wainscot because we'll have a plainer backdrop if we don't have the wainscot. The wainscot just adds to the busyness of the space if you're going to set an exhibit in front of it.
Jim,
So
Jim,
for a
could I
backdrop to
propose
that,
it? Could I, Barry, I'm going to interrupt for a
Yeah.
minute. I would like some time to go off by myself now and kind of think about things and think about different stages. And, you know, right now I'm kind of a proponent of a holistic approach, but not doing it all at once, and to
Yeah.
maybe kind of think
Yeah.
about how that could happen. And I would like the time to go off, and I'm going to propose that maybe we continue with this discussion at another meeting after
oh, I
we
agree. Yeah.
collect our thoughts.
Okay.
Well, that was part of why I thought it would be good to talk about it today, was to just,
Yes.
just
Yeah, get it started.
scratch
I'm
the
glad-
surface a little bit. And
Yeah.
then we can go on to, you know, it makes us better prepared to talk more later.
Yeah, excellent.
Well, I'll try to have something specific, and hopefully Janet will join us at the society board meetings,
Yes.
so we can get a programming idea to go forward. And do you want a separate meeting to discuss the two reports, or do you want to discuss those at our next commission meeting?
I think maybe table it to the next.
That's only 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay,
yeah.
so we can do that.
That's okay.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right, so I'll
Yeah.
just put that on the agenda for,
And we can all be reviewing those reports in the meantime, so that we're
we can talk about it.
Yeah,
Okay.
ready to talk about them more.
All righty. So is there any other business? I
No,
don't think.
I think that's good.
Okay. Okay. So can we have a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Okay, a second?
Second,
All those we have to have a roll call
Yeah.
vote. Yes, Barry
all right.
and Janet
Aye.
and June, aye. Okay, thank you, everybody.